So we'll get started. You want to say a few things? You want to say a few things?
We'll go over and say, okay, Karen, good to see you. If you want to talk to the whole group about these.
Oh, you wanna talk to the whole group about
I
it?
know, you guys.
Huh?
First question is, you mentioned that you get a powder for seaweed sometimes.
Yeah, it's adults, it's like little flakes, dulse
Where
flakes.
do you get
It's
it?
not in powder. It's, you can get dulse that is kind of in strips, it's seaweed. We buy it on Amazon.
Oh. I would
And,
think. Or something, you want to do whatever.
So what do you have here? Saffron extra. Saffron's supposed to be that very expensive.
Yeah, Dr. Greger said that, it's a great fight, but.
Oh, yeah.
These are pills that are supposed to help remove.
So the thing is, you see this word here that says supplement facts on it. I haven't analyzed this, but Gregor has a number of videos that share the facts that supplements are an unregulated industry, and you may not find there's actually saffron in here, and you might find some other contaminants like lead or arsenic or other things in the processing of this. And so I couldn't recommend that anybody take this unless I really felt confident that the company was reliable and that there was what's in here is in here.
But it's not open, so I can take it back.
Yeah, so that's the only issue I have with that supplement issue.
This is,
Kelp,
a little
iodine.
more expensive than the one that was, potassium something.
It's 225 micrograms, which is the right amount. 150 is actually the correct amount. So I would take this maybe 5 times a week. I wouldn't take it every day, but maybe 5 of those a week would give you the amount of iodine that you're looking at. You're looking at 150 micrograms of iodine. Kelp has especially high amounts of iodine, so they must have.
That's why.
So, but that's in the ballpark range. I would say I wouldn't take it every single day, but 5 times, 5 days a week would be okay.
Thank you.
My best thoughts. Okay. Welcome to everybody who's here. Tonight's going to be another interesting session, especially for those of you who care about diabetes. And I imagine there are a few of you in this room who do care. And maybe there's someone online who cares about diabetes. So the goal is to answer your questions. These classes are for you. Scott's going to give the presentation tonight, and we're going to have some fun at it. And before we continue on, is there anybody else who has any thoughts or suggestions, or they want to say anything before we move on to the next issue? Okay, so then if you think of something soon, I won't hold the mic back from you. I do want to share again that for those of you who only come to one class, or you have a calendar, you keep in the distance. Remember, the Vegan Fest is coming May 3rd. Put it on your calendars if you already haven't done it. And then Dr. Clapper is going to be here on May 4th for a talk at Springfield High School. And that's going to be a free event. And let's see, what else can I tell you that I'm excited about? We do have classes at Natural Grocers on Wednesday afternoon for some people who can't come to the evening classes. And a new series will start in January. Let's see, what else? I went on the Polar Express train. Anybody know about that? Oh, I went with my granddaughter, she's 7 years old. It's a train ride from Hood River outside of Portland. It's about an hour from Portland toward the Dalles. And you get on the train, 90-minute ride. Santa comes, the elves come. It's quite a treat for the children. Now, I never had heard about it, but my son told us about it. We said, let's try it. We thought it was going to be boring. It was a real treat. So, if you haven't done it before, you have grandkids, think about it. With that said, time to turn this over. Scott, thank you.
For the new people, I'm talking loudly for all of you to hear and hear. The microphone is actually for the people online. So it's also live online on Zoom. And then if anything you heard in here you're confused about or you wanted to hear again, it gets recorded and gets posted to the website. So just go on to livelifestylemedicine.com, watch the website tutorial on the about 2/3 of the way down on the homepage, gives you a tour of where everything is on the website, how to navigate around and all that. So check that out. Also, all the class schedules are there. Bathrooms in the back, the blending library back there. Take a class schedule. And then, yeah, just recommend spending some time on the website and see where there's a class schedule at the bottom of the homepage as well. And it has also Charlie's classes on Wednesdays are on there as well, the dates and the topics and all that stuff. So check all those resources out. And so, I guess everyone knows me in here. I introduced myself to you guys. So I'm a physician associate for 20 years here in the area. Work at the community health centers of Lane County at a community health center, and do family practice. But tonight I'm going to be talking about diabetes. So I just wanted to, since you guys were new, I'll give you a real quick story. How I got into this was my own health. I was my first patient. So I basically was heavy exerciser, had what I felt like was a really healthy lifestyle, but I didn't obviously have the food right, because despite lots of thousands of miles a year on my bicycle, I still had high blood pressure, high cholesterol, had pre-diabetes, had irritable bowel, had heartburn. It was 47 pounds heavier despite all that heavy exercise. And so then I started researching nutrition, found that I should be on a more whole food, plant-based diet, moved in that direction and got my health back, lost 47 pounds, dropped my cholesterol 100 points, reversed my prediabetes, my heartburn, my irritable bowel, got really healthy despite less exercise from then on, because I was riding like 7,000 miles a year on my bike back then. Now it's like 2,000 or 3,000 miles a year on my bicycle. So it was the food I had wrong. So once I did that for myself, I started teaching it to my patients, and I was able to get a lot of my patients off their insulin, off their other blood pressure pills, other diabetes medications. And so I always want to say, especially for this diabetes talk, that if you do have diabetes, you're on blood pressure medicines, diabetes medicines, make sure you're in contact with your medical provider before making big changes, because food is medicine and it's really powerful. So your blood sugar could drop too low, blood pressure could drop too low, and I had to titrate medicines down on a lot of my patients, and that could happen to many of you as well. So real important to mention that. And so one reason I want to talk to you about diabetes tonight, I mean, how many people in here either have diabetes, know someone with diabetes, we all pretty much know, or even pre-diabetes, right? Yeah. And it's insulin, it's felt that about 2/3 of the population actually has insulin resistance, upwards of 70%. And insulin resistance is really the Darth Vader, so to speak, of diabetes, is insulin resistance. So you could even, you have insulin resistance for decades before you ever even have blood sugars that start to go up. And insulin resistance, we're finding, is actually the big culprit when it comes to a lot of the health problems that are associated with it. So I'll have a slide about that here in a little bit. But the reason I want to kind of give you a brief story of how I got into diabetes, and I mean, despite, I do have a lot of patients with it, but kind of the pathway I got to what I'm going to talk about and how I learned more about insulin resistance had to do with kind of the paradigm of what we thought about treating diabetes about 15 years ago now. So my story kind of started in 2008. So in 2008, actually in 2005 is when I graduated PA school, but my first job in Salem for the first couple of years, I was working at a clinic where we were trying to really, it was really low budget, and we were trying to take care of all the different kinds of patients ourselves and not have to refer out if we could help it, because it was more cost effective that way. And so every provider kind of had their own little area of expertise. And so some people were really good with women's health, some were with autoimmune disease like rheumatology, others more endocrinology. I was more the diabetes kind of specialist, because that was something that I really read every journal I could get a hold of, was really, really into treating diabetes. And so they would send, so the other doctors in the clinic would send me their really difficult patients with diabetes. And so I was taking care of a lot of patients with diabetes. And so I was actually going to the national conferences. I went to the Diabetes Educator Conference, the American Diabetes Association conferences. I'd go to all that stuff. And the kind of the thought process or the paradigm in that at that time was treat diabetes super aggressive. Get the A1C blood sugars down to normal, like someone without diabetes. However, you got to do it with multiple medications, insulin, whatever you got to do. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. It's like, well, if because the blood sugars are high, if that's what's causing the increased risk of heart attacks and strokes and blindness and amputations and kidney failure and all the kind of the bad stuff that happens with diabetes, maybe if we have the blood sugars be normal, maybe we won't have those complications. And so, yeah, do you have a question? So if you guys know what the hemoglobin A1C is, okay, so it's a 3-month average blood sugar test, and so normal is 5.6% or less, and so what that means is 5.6% of your hemoglobin molecules that are circulating in your bloodstream have a sugar molecule attached to them, and that's normal. So just like the body, if you put a steel plate out on the lawn and it sits out there in the rain, it's going to rust, right? And so it's oxidation is what that is. And so our bodies, any protein in the body actually gets glycated. Glycation is kind of similar to, it's a form of oxidation. And so glycation means sugar attaches to something. And so even our red blood cells have have some sugar attached to them because it gets glycated by the sugar that's in our bloodstream. And so we have this number A1C. And so 5.6 and below is normal. 5.7 up to 6.4%, we call that pre-diabetes. And then 6.5% and above is diabetes. And so that percent number can be equated out to a blood sugar. Like if you had one of those continuous glucose monitors on, and so like say it was 6.5 or something like that, then that's 130 was your average blood sugar over the last 3 months. If you had a glucose monitor on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's good. It's a good question to kind of, so people can understand kind of what's the A1C and the blood sugar. So anyway, if we got the blood sugar down to normal, we thought it would be okay. So we need studies, just like anything. That's a theory, but we need actually good studies to say, well, does this actually work? And so there was 3 big trials that were being done back at that time: the VA study, the Accord trial. There's a couple of other studies that were done. And when I went to the American Diabetes Association conference in San Francisco in 2008, the results of these studies were going to be published. And so we were all really excited to see what the results were and everything. And what it ended up happening is the people that were in the really aggressive treated arm of the study versus the usual care, the people that were in the really aggressive group were actually dying faster. It was causing harm. So they had to stop those studies early because it was killing people. And so we were really upset by that because we thought, why is that? We later found out it's by driving the blood sugar down so low, you were causing hypoglycemia, and it was causing a lot of stress on the body and things like that. It did show, the aggressive treated group did show slight decrease in some of the eye problems and the kidney problems, but actually were dying sooner. So that's more important, obviously. And so the reason I'm telling you that is because at that time, this was, I didn't go plant-based until 2012, but at least at that time, it made me feel kind of, okay, I need to rethink this. I shouldn't be treating people so aggressively. And so now you might notice your doctors, we kind of, if you're 80 or 90 years old, we're not going to drive the A1C down. We usually like it to get it to around 7% or a little bit lower. But someone that's 80 years old, maybe we're only going to worry about driving it down to 7.5 or 8. Because if you start getting it down around 7 or lower, you're going to increase that risk of the low blood sugar and actually increase the risk of having a heart attack or stroke, dying early. So because of the information we learned from those studies back in 2008. So that's kind of the new paradigm with treating diabetes now. But what's important then is rethinking, we got to do something different. And now since that time, we've really learned it's insulin resistance that's the culprit. I mean, yeah, we don't want to have really uncontrolled high blood sugars, but that's just the symptom. So if we think about a cold, if you have a cold and you have a runny nose and you're sneezing and you're coughing, those are symptoms, right? Those symptoms are not the actual cause of the cold. That's just the symptom of the virus, right? So when we have a cold virus in us, that virus is actually the culprit. That's what caused the symptoms. And so high blood sugar is really just a symptom of insulin resistance. And what I'm hoping you guys will learn tonight, the most important thing about this talk is learning what is insulin resistance and why is it so bad. So I wanted to give you that info. Next slide. I have some kind of boring statistics, prevalence slides here. Here's a quote, Desmond Tutu. There comes a point where we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. So that's just the treat the cause, the root cause, which is what lifestyle medicine is all about, treating root causes of disease rather than just symptoms. Next slide. And so we're mostly going to be talking about type 2 diabetes tonight. That's 90 to 95% of all diabetes. I'm just going to give you a quick rundown of the other types. So prediabetes is like I talked about, 5.7 to 6.4 A1C, fasting blood sugar between 100 and 125. So those top two then essentially, I mean, type 2 is 90 to 95%, but prediabetes is up to another, 100, like 30 to 40% of the population also has prediabetes. And then type 1 is just no, you don't make insulin. So think of type 1 as just autoimmune. So your own immune system attacks the cells that make insulin. You don't make insulin anymore. And so you can still have insulin resistance and essentially like have type 2 diabetes also with type 1, which is really important. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But type 1, the only thing you have to really remember is if you have type 1, you don't make insulin anymore. And so you always have to inject insulin, even if you completely change your diet and lifestyle and get really good control of the diabetes, but you're always going to need insulin because your body just doesn't make it anymore. So we would die without insulin. So that's what type 1 is. And you always heard in the past about it as juvenile onset because it most often happens to children and adolescents. But then there's also type 1.5 diabetes, which is LADA, which stands for latent autoimmune diabetes in adults. So it's like a type 1 diabetes that you get later in life. And there's tests you can do for that, autoantibodies and C-peptide. There's some ways to diagnose that. Doesn't have a whole lot, but I have had patients where I've tested for like they're got under good control. They're on insulin, and I got them under really good control with the plant-based diet and healthy lifestyle. And I got their insulin requirements way down. It's like I couldn't get them off the insulin, and I was like, okay, well. And a lot of times they've lost a lot of weight and they're actually normal weight. It's like, well, what's going on? Oh, well, let's test you for this type 1.5. And a lot of times they test positive. So it just means that now they're like a type 1. Their immune system eventually destroyed what was left of their insulin production. And it's just, or their insulin is fried. Basically, the cells that make insulin have been so burned out over so many years, they just don't make insulin anymore. And so they essentially become a type 1. So it is more complicated, and then gestational, we all know that, right? So women that are pregnant, they do the glucose tolerance test and they can get diabetes while they're pregnant. And usually most of the time it goes away once they deliver the baby. But we do know that women that develop gestational diabetes are really high risk for developing type 2 diabetes later in life. So that's important. So any questions about the types of diabetes? I already told you my diabetes story. So yeah. So the question is, is the cause the same thing for type 1 and type 2 diabetes? No. So type 2 diabetes is purely caused by insulin resistance. There are genetic factors, genetic predisposition. So pretty much like Indian population, Native American population, Latino population, Asian population, there's other populations that are higher risk for developing type 2 diabetes, whereas type 1 is completely autoimmune. And there's some thoughts about the causes that dairy is one of the leading theories as to being a cause. The proteins that are in dairy can cause type 1. So these are all theories. We don't know for sure. But so the cause of type 1 is autoimmune, whereas type 2 is insulin resistance with a genetic factor that comes into it. You're welcome. Next slide.
What's that FBG?
Fasting blood glucose. So FBG is fasting. Yeah. So if you haven't eaten or drank anything for 8 hours or more, except for water, fasting blood sugar of 100, 125 is pre-diabetes. Normal would be less than 100, and then diabetes would be 126 or higher on a fasting blood sugar. Can also random blood sugar of 200 or higher is also considered diabetes. So there's different criteria we use, multiple criteria you can use to diagnose it, but it has to be subsequent. It can't just be on one day. It has to be like you have to have two separate A1Cs 3 months apart that are 6.5 or higher. You'd have to have a fasting blood sugar elevated more than one time, and then a random blood sugar more than one day as well. So there's different medical criteria for getting an official diagnosis of that. But you're going to learn that having a high blood sugar is a late sign of diabetes. So because insulin resistance is going on in the body for decades before you'll ever have a blood sugar even go up. So so here's some of the prevalence in 2023: 38.4 million in the United States with diabetes, 97.6 million with prediabetes. So look at that. So that's like, if you think about, how many people are in the United States? Is it 330 now? So look at that. That's like, that's 135 million people in the United States have either diabetes or prediabetes, and only 1 out of 10 know they even have prediabetes. And that happens all the time when I do routine blood work on my patients. It's like, oh, you have prediabetes, and that was the first they'd ever knew about it or anything. And then, so 136 million Americans with diabetes, prediabetes, which is a third of the population. And then there's the cost in 2022, 413 billion for direct and indirect costs. And this is all from the CDC. Next slide. You can skip that video. Okay, so insulin resistance. So I'm gonna kind of explain it to you, and then we're gonna do kind of just a visual experiment here to kind of demonstrate what it is. So what it is it's caused by the storage of fat in tissues that are not designed to store fat. And so what that is more specifically is, where are we designed to store fat? So we're just throw out some answers. Where are we supposed to store fat for calories? Fat's supposed to be stored so we can, if we don't have any food, we can draw from our fat stores so we don't starve to death. So where should we be depositing fat on our body? Muscles. So that actually we don't want to put it there, but but we're going to get to that. So so it's a good segue. Where are we supposed to put it?
Men sure put it in their belly.
Your belly, right? So what's the ideal place to put it if you're going to put it? Or just if you just think about it kind of logically, where would it make sense to put it? Buttocks, hips, a little bit marbled in it everywhere, but really the hips and the buttocks is where we should kind of put it. So because what we know is if we put it in the stomach, that's what we call more metabolically active fat area. And that's actually associated with more health problems, that like you see the pear-shaped people and the apple-shaped people. So pears tend to be more metabolically healthy than apple-shaped people. So where you put it does make a difference. And so that's where, and if you think about it, we don't want to put too much on, because if you go back to the hunter-gatherer days, if you were 300 pounds overweight, you wouldn't be able to run away from the predator or climb a tree or anything like that, right? And so some people actually, some scientists theorize that insulin resistance is actually a normal compensatory mechanism. Because what you find is that, and he alluded to it earlier with putting it in your muscles, if you start putting fat in places that it's not designed to be stored, it starts causing problems. And so, because we want to put it places like here, and because then just have a little bit so that we can draw, if we have famine, we can draw from those fat stores. And those of us that are alive today are alive because we were good at storing fat. The people that you always hear about, the people that eat as much as they want and they're rail thin, right? Those people would not have survived, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, because they would have starved to death because they can't store. And so if there's no food for 2 or 3 weeks, you're done. Whereas if you have an extra 30, 40, 50 pounds of fat on your body somewhere, you're going to be able to draw from those fat stores to survive. Did you have a question, Ken?
Well, just, I'm interested in, a lot of massive bodybuilders. I mean,
Yeah.
they're almost grotesque. A lot moved on.
Yeah.
Not too case from taking steroids, but it could very well be from starving to death. They don't have any fat.
Well, they still have fat, but it's more to do with it's really hard on their hearts. Taking all the steroids, everything else is not good. But they tend to still have a fair amount of body fat, maybe 4 to 8% body fat, things like that. 4 to 8, yeah. Sometimes people like you see the pictures that Charlie shows of like the ultra marathoners and stuff like that. They're like body fat, where we're more designed to be 10 to 15% body fat, closer to 15 to 20% body fat. It's kind of been the ideal over time thing. But I don't want to get off too much in a tangent, but so if we're putting fat in places, so some people genetically we figured out, because you also see like people that are sometimes 200 and 300 pounds overweight and they actually don't have diabetes. You're like, could they not have diabetes? Because they're not developing insulin resistance. They're putting the fat in their subcutaneous tissue like they're supposed to, and not putting it in places that, or when I talk about the muscles and some other places, that's more harmful. And so they seem to not have that compensatory mechanism. So they wouldn't have been able to escape the predator and climb the tree because they're too overweight, right? And so, yeah, question.
Sorry, I
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
interrupt.
Yeah.
So you have cells. that
Yeah.
store fat, is that
Right. Yeah.
And so, if you gain weight and you say you gain weight around your middle, are the fat cells just getting bigger or do you get more of them?
Mostly just getting bigger. They swell up. Yeah. And so, but you can, accumulate more and more, but mostly they're just getting bigger and bigger.
Where are they around the muscle?
They're kind of everywhere. They're outside of the muscle, so they're on top of the muscle. So you have like there's a six pack under there, but there's some some fat over top of it. So when we start storing fat in our muscles, in our muscle cells, in our liver cells, in our cells of the pancreas, it starts going in places that it's not designed to go. That's what starts causing problems. So insulin resistance is fat being stored in places that's not designed to store fat. And so one of the examples that how we figured this out was all of a sudden in Asian countries, they're starting to develop diabetes without even being overweight. And so we're like, well, wait a minute. So most people in America, when they develop diabetes, they're 20, 30, 40 pounds overweight, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. So it's like, well, everybody will get overweight first and then develop insulin resistance and diabetes. Well, what's going on in Asian countries? Because they'll be thin, they look normal. Compared to an American, they look skinny, but they're already developing diabetes. And so they tried to figure out, okay, well, where is the fat then? Where's the fat being stored? And because of this new technology called magnetic resonance spectroscopy, MR spectroscope scans, it's like an MRI kind of a scan, and it can show you where fat is. And so you look at an Asian person that's skinny, and you look, where's the fat? Oh, it's in there. Look at that. All the fat's in their liver, it's in their muscles, it's in their pancreas. It's there. It's just you don't see it because it's not in the subcutaneous tissue. And they're developing diabetes. And so that made us go into a little more study on what's causing this and what effect does this fat there have on our metabolism, on our ability for insulin to do its job. And that's what we're going to talk about here.
So so you have fat cells or is the fat stored in your normal cells? And to your statement about Asian people, are those additional cells that are storing fat, or is it just fat building up in their?
Just
like,
fat building
their
up inside,
cells?
just fat building up it's not being stored. It's actually just in a place that it's not supposed to be.
Or is
It's
it
just,
the
it's invading. No, we'll get into it. Just kind of go on the ride. It'll become more clear in a minute. And so, yeah, those are great questions though. So, and the reason they use the Asian population besides that is because they're starting to westernize their diets so much there. So because they're doing lots of dairy, lots more meat. So instead of rice and vegetables, their traditional Asian diets, they're starting to Americanize, westernize their diet. And so they're getting diabetes, heart disease, getting sick just like we are, even at faster rates. And so we think they're also genetically predisposed population. So I'm going to demonstrate kind of what insulin resistance does inside of a cell, and so that you can understand why you would eventually develop high blood sugar, develop diabetes. And so let's pretend that this inside of this sanctuary is a muscle cell. So how many people in here took like a biology class, like in high school or whatever? And so, yeah, do you remember some of the parts of the cell, the mitochondria and things like that? And the mitochondria produces ATP, which is the energy that your cell produces, right? So let's pretend that this piano here is the mitochondria. It's the powerhouse of the cell, right? That's what we call the mitochondria. Think of it as like a furnace that heats your house. So it's in charge of burning up energy and producing energy. So it's going to take in fuel and it's going to burn and it's going to put out energy to power the cell. And let's say out there in the fellowship hall where the lending library is, let's say that is the bloodstream out there. So those double doors back there would be closed, and that's the kind of the entrance into the cell, and the bloodstream is rushing by out there in the fellowship hall. Okay, so I'm going to describe to you normal physiology. What's a normal condition? Okay, so we eat some food, and it's going to have some fat, and it's going to have some carbohydrate in it. So it's going to then get made into sugar, right? So it's going to be sugar and fat, and then protein. Protein's part of it too, but I don't want to get too in depth on some of that stuff. But so there's sugar out in the bloodstream, right? And it ends up that sugar can't just come inside the cell on its own. It has to have an invitation, and that invitation is insulin, right? And so insulin has to let the sugar come inside the muscle cell in here. So out there in the bloodstream, there's sugar, there's some fat. Fat doesn't need an invitation. Fat can just barge right on in. So fat's coming in here, and insulin's letting some sugar in. So this is going on all the time in our body, especially after we've eaten. And so then the mitochondria over here can burn fat and it can burn sugar for energy. And so normally what happens is there's a little bit of fat in here, and that mitochondria can burn up some of that fat and it can produce that ATP for energy. But there's not a lot of fat in here because it was just say you had a whole grain bowl, you had fruits and vegetables, beans, whole grains, potatoes, things like that. There's some fat in there, but not a lot. And so there's a nice combination of fat in here. And the cells, the mitochondria is saying, yeah, I could probably use a little more energy here. And then insulin knocks on the door and says, hey, yeah, our sugar's starting to kind of go up out here in the bloodstream. Can we let some sugar come in? And the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the furnace, says, yeah, come on in. I got not very much fat in here. I want some sugar to come in here. And so then the insulin is the key, unlocks the door, and sugar starts to come in from out there in the bloodstream. And now the powerhouse, the furnace, burns up some sugar. So it's burning up sugar, it's burning up fat, it's happy, everything's fine. But now what happens if you decide to have a bacon double cheeseburger and some ice cream and French fries and bacon and sausage and eggs for breakfast, and just the standard American diet? There's a ton of fat in there, right? A lot of saturated fat in there too, a lot of saturated animal fat. So what happens then is there's so much fat out in that bloodstream. And remember, it doesn't need an invitation. It just comes on in here. There's a ton of fat inside this cell now. And this is what you can see on that MR spectra scan. the fat that's sitting inside this muscle cell, you can see it on an imaging test. And so then what happens is that furnace is trying to burn it up as fast as it can. It's using that fat for energy, but there's still sugar also in there because there was plenty of other carbohydrates and sugars and things like that in the food, not just protein and fat. And so the blood sugar is going up and up and up out in the bloodstream. So the insulin starts knocking on the door. Hey, furnace, we got lots of sugar out here in the bloodstream. Can we come in? And the furnace says, nope, you can't come in. I got so much fat in here. You're not coming in. That's insulin resistance. So the insulin is knocking on the door, there's something coming up the lock. The insulin's trying to unlock the door, but it won't open because the mitochondria decided, no, you can't let sugar in because I got to burn up all this fat first. So then you start coming to classes and you stop eating or decreasing at least all the fast food and all the high fat standard American diet fare. And eventually this fat in here will get used up. It's eventually going to get used up. But if you kind of shut the faucet off out there, it's going to go back to that normal physiology where there's just a little bit of fat in here. And then the insulin will start working and the sugar will start coming in again. So that is what insulin resistance is. Any questions about that? Can you kind of visualize that? And that's happening in the liver and in the pancreas, and the fat's also kind of destroying the cells that make insulin, and it's very toxic. There's lots of toxic metabolites from especially saturated animal fat that's leading to it, because it's not as simple as just, oh, this is furnace is saying, no, you can't come in. There's actually enzymatic reactions, dozens of them happening to open up the glucose transport molecule. And Dr. Greger has videos that show all of that, and I have them on here, but I just kind of wanted to give you a more simplistic look at it. So any thoughts or questions about how what insulin resistance is? You actually guys know now more about insulin resistance than most medical providers out there, even endocrinologists a lot of times. And this fat is called intramyocellular lipid. So intra means within, myo muscle, cellular cell, lipid fat. Intramyocellular lipid, that's what that is. And why is insulin resistance bad? So go to the next slide. So insulin resistance influences all of these things: coronary artery disease, cancer, all the types of diabetes, prediabetes, chronic kidney disease, Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is actually being called insulin resistance of the brain. So this glucose dysregulation that's happening in the muscle cells is also happening in the brain. And it's also being called type 3 diabetes. They're kind of referring to Alzheimer's as. Fatty liver, makes sense, right? You're storing fat in the muscles and the liver, like I talked about. High cholesterol, high blood pressure, obesity, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is influenced by insulin resistance as well. That's where women can't get pregnant. They have a lot of cysts on their ovaries and excess androgens, so they have abnormal male pattern hair growth and baldness and things like that. A lot of times when you reverse the insulin resistance, the women start to ovulate and can get pregnant if you reverse the insulin resistance. Neuropathy, retinopathy. So neuropathy is, in the feet, retinopathy in the eye, erectile dysfunction. So those are just some of the many conditions that are influenced by insulin resistance. And I wanted to point out that type 2, type 1, 1.5 are all influenced by insulin resistance as well. So I've had many patients, and Charlie has friends that they sometimes come and speak at our classes. He has had type 1 diabetes. And so even someone with type 1 diabetes, a lot of times even though the boy's on insulin, they'll have insulin resistance too. So they'll be on, say, 50, 60, 70 units of insulin a day. They have all the complications. So they have the retinopathy, the neuropathy, the kidney problems. They have really poor, a lot of times pretty poor control because they're on so much insulin, because they're actually have insulin resistance too. So it's almost like they have type 1 and type 2 diabetes. And the difference is if you reverse the insulin resistance, you'll get healthier and get better, but you'll still need to be on insulin. So I've had many patients with type 1 diabetes where they were on 50, 70, even 100 units of insulin a day. And when I got them on a whole food plant-based diet and got lifestyle medicine, all the pillars of lifestyle medicine, now they're only on maybe 20 to 30 units of insulin a day, which is actually what we call physiologic insulin. So all of us sitting in the room that don't have diabetes or not on insulin, we're kicking out about 20 to 30 units of insulin a day from our pancreas to control our blood sugar throughout the day. And so that's about what normal insulin levels are for people. And so you can actually improve the insulin sensitivity. So, someone you always hear about people with type 1, like they have to count their carbs and they know how much insulin to give, depending on how many carbs are in the meal. And I've had patients where they had to have 1 unit of insulin for every 3 to 4 grams of carbohydrate in a meal, which means they have lots of insulin resistance and poor insulin sensitivity. And then when they cleaned up their diet, they went to 20 to 1. So they eat 20 grams of carbs for every 1 unit of insulin. So what that tells you is that, oh, they had tons of insulin resistance. Now their insulin resistance has gone way down and their insulin sensitivity has gone way up. So they're really sensitive to their insulin, which is what we all want. We want to have just enough insulin to control our blood sugars. We don't want to have more, because extra insulin actually is related to more cancers and more weight gain and things like that. You always hear people say, yeah, I'm going up and up and up on my insulin. I keep gaining weight and my doctor keeps criticizing me for gaining weight. It's like, well, insulin makes you gain weight. And so I've had patients with type 2 diabetes who are on 300 and 400 units of insulin a day because they're trying to overcome that insulin resistance, because you can overpower it somewhat. So if this whole demonstration I did, if you gave enough insulin for someone that's insulin dependent, because their blood sugars aren't being controlled any other way, you can kind of knock that door down a little bit and force some insulin to open up the door to let some sugar in. But that's not an ideal situation. And then we know things like exercise is good and actually allows insulin to come in easier. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But any thoughts so far about anything? I know I'm doing a lot of talking here. So other questions, comments about insulin resistance and why it's so bad? You can go to the next slide. Next slide. That's a video. Next slide. That's another video. Okay. But yeah, so any questions before I go into this keto caveat? Any questions, thoughts, anything about insulin resistance, the cause of type 2 diabetes? Is this making sense? So what foods are the foods you should avoid then if you're trying to get rid of insulin resistance? Name some foods that you should probably avoid. Meats and fats. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So sugar's not helpful either. But one thing that's really interesting, I think I'll pull out some old information here. So there was a study called the Sweeney study, and it was done in 1928. And in 1928, the Sweeney study, he was a professor was teaching at a medical school. And so he had a theory. And so he took totally normal 18 to 22-year-old medical students, or maybe they're early 20s because they're already in medical school. And he had them in 2 groups. One group was eating, like chicken, pork, cheese, just really fatty foods. And the other group it was not a healthy diet at all. The other group was like maple syrup and white rice and sugar and candy. It was like just crap, but it was no fat and lots of sugar. And the other group was tons of fat. And what happened within a week, everyone in the high fat group all developed insulin resistance. So what he did is he gave everybody a glucose tolerance test. And one of the best tests for insulin resistance is actually still the old fashioned glucose tolerance test, where you drink the solution of sugar. So you measure the fasting blood sugar, get a 70-gram challenge of sugar, check the blood sugar an hour later, 2 hours later, 4 hours later. And if the sugar shoots really high, that means you have insulin resistance. So you have poor insulin sensitivity and you have lots of insulin resistance. So we tested each of these groups, and the ones that ate the low fat but totally crappy sugary diet, they were normal. They had a normal glucose tolerance test, whereas the ones that ate the high fat, they failed it. So they already were developing insulin resistance in hours. And so it doesn't mean that we should eat sugar, because that's just empty calories and garbage, right? But it's not sugar that causes diabetes. It's actually fat that causes diabetes. So we've all kind of been sold on, avoid sugar and eat low carb and all that, so you can actually not develop diabetes. It's like, so that's not based on what the science shows. And we even knew that back in 1928 with that Sweeney study. And But is a good segue to the keto caveat, because I have patients all the time, and you probably heard too, like, oh, when I went on a low carb diet, so I'm eating high fat, high protein, low carb, my insulin requirements went down, my blood sugars went down, everything, I was losing weight, everything was looking better. And the reason is because keeping carbohydrates low will stabilize your blood sugar, because if you're cutting out almost all the carbs, then the blood sugar is not going to be very high out there. Even though there's tons of fat inside here, inside the muscle cell, it's loaded with fat, but you're not going to know because the sugar's not very high out there in the bloodstream. And so you don't really know you have insulin resistance. And the only way you would know is because you'll hear, oh, well, my fasting blood sugar was normal, my insulin levels were normal. And so you would think, oh, I don't have insulin resistance. It's like, no, the only way to really know is to do a glucose tolerance test. And so when you put someone that's on a low carb ketogenic type of diet and you give them a glucose tolerance test, their sugars will usually go through the roof because they have lots of insulin resistance. You just don't know it. So yeah, A1C, fasting insulin requirements, and fasting blood sugar are incomplete information. I mean, they do tend to get better if you do reverse insulin resistance, but that's why it's a caveat. It's not always, that's not quite enough information. You have to do a glucose tolerance test and carbohydrate to insulin ratio. So another one, like I was talking to you guys about earlier, like my type 1s where they had the 4-to-1 ratio, then went to 20-to-1 ratio, their insulin requirements then went down also. And they can tolerate carbohydrate. So you want to have normal physiology. You want to be carbohydrate tolerant. You don't want to be carbohydrate intolerant, because that means it's almost like Dr. Greger says, it's like being disabled. So if you say you fell and broke your hip and you're like, well, okay, I don't want to have surgery. I don't want to fix the problem. I just won't walk again. I'll just stay in a wheelchair. So that's what like going on a low carb diet is like. Well, I'm just going to stay on a low carb diet. Well, yeah, if your blood sugar never goes up, you never eat a lot of carbohydrates to like your blood sugar go up, then yeah, you might ultimately have normal blood sugars and most of your labs will be normal, but you still have insulin resistance. So you still have a broken hip. You're just never going to get up again. And so you want to be able to eat those healthy fruits and vegetables, beans and whole grains. And you saw from that previous slide, having insulin resistance is bad. Even if your blood sugars are normal, having insulin resistance is associated with all of those problems I had listed there. So you don't want insulin resistance. You want to get rid of it. So people that are following those ketogenic, low carbohydrate diets, not only are they hiding their insulin resistance, causing all those health problems, but think about all that fat clogging up the heart arteries, all that animal protein, increasing your risk for cancer. And what we do have studies on low carb diets that show even up to 5 years. It was a study out of Sweden, and they took patients that had already had a heart attack and they followed them. It wouldn't pass an ethics board. So people that chose to follow a low carb, animal-based low carb diet after they had a heart attack. This was in Sweden. And after 5 years, the people that were on the low carb ketogenic type of a diet had a 51% higher risk of death than the people that were not following that diet. So we know it's not healthy to do long term. So any questions about that? And the number one cause of death in the population is heart disease. And those with diabetes, actually, if you've ever heard of, so someone that has diabetes has the same risk of having a heart attack or a stroke as someone that's already had a heart attack or a stroke. We call that a risk equivalent, which is why your doctors might, if someone that has diabetes, we're always trying to get them on statins and everything else, because it's what we call a secondary prevention. It's like you have really high risk of having a heart attack or stroke. You should be on a statin. That's why we try to get statins to the patients with diabetes. But so why would anyone recommend eating the foods? If you look at, following, like you were here last week about heart disease. And so we know that you don't want to be eating lots of saturated animal fat or cholesterol if you're trying to prevent heart disease or treat heart disease. So why would you recommend? I mean, doctors all the time are recommending low carb types of diets for people with diabetes. Like, well, why? What are they going to be eating more of? Animal fat, animal protein, cholesterol, all the things that the science really shows you don't want to eat. If in all the essentially American Heart Association, American College of Cardiology, all of the authorities in heart disease are saying don't eat saturated fat, don't eat cholesterol, cut down on the animal products if you want to prevent or reverse heart disease. And yet those same doctors or whatever saying, well, you have diabetes, so don't eat carbohydrates, eat more protein, right? But what are they telling them? Eat more animal products, eat more saturated fat, eat more cholesterol. So there's a big disconnect, and the messaging is not good. So it's really important to think about that. Any questions about the keto aspect of things? I think that's really important because it's still a really popular diet right now. I even followed a Atkins diet for like 3 years. It's been about 20 years ago now, because I was just read Atkins' book and I didn't know anything about nutrition. I was just like, oh, this looks good, and oh, I like eating that food. I'll do that. And I lost some weight, and my wife lost some weight. But it's like because all the studies at the time were just short term, like a year or less. And yeah, you could lose some weight, and because anytime you lose weight, your numbers will get better. Your cholesterol will go down if you lose weight. Your blood sugars tend to go down if you lose weight. So there's health things that look better on paper if you lose weight. But also, if you go on cancer chemotherapy and lose weight, your cholesterol will go down, your blood sugar will go down. You look healthier on paper, but we know you're not, right? And so that's kind of almost like what kind of keto does, is it puts you in this ketosis, makes you feel sick, makes you not feel hungry, kind of suppresses your appetite. It's actually a state of illness, really. It's a natural kind of condition that we need for when we have to fast. So because our brain can only use sugar for energy. And so it can't use fat, it can't use protein, it can only use sugar. And so ketones are a type of sugar. So fat gets broken down from the fat stores and then produces ketones, and that can go to the brain so your brain can stay alive. And so when we fast, we need to be able to go into ketosis to survive, but it's not designed to be a state that you stay in for long term and things like that. So questions, comments, anything? Carnivore diet.
Same thing, or is it just?
Well, if you just ate meat, you wouldn't have any carbohydrates, so you would go into ketosis. Most of the time, people don't stay in ketosis because it's not a natural state to stay in long term. The only population that's ever lived on the planet that was in ketosis for long periods of time were the Inuit Eskimos, because there's part of the year where they have to live on seal meat and whale blubber because they don't have any other calories. And so they actually have a genetic mutation that keeps them from being in ketosis, because it's such a bad thing to do for a long time. So that over the thousands of years, they developed a mutation to keep them out of ketosis, but those people are not healthy. They're really high rates of osteoporosis, heart disease, diabetes. They're not healthy, but they don't want to starve to death. So there's times of the year where they have to live on some of those foods. So they've been studied for some of that. So next slide. See, I want to talk a little bit about exercise, sleep, and stress, because this has a huge influence on insulin resistance. So yeah, the food, we always say the food, that's the most important thing. But these things come into play as well, because when we exercise, I alluded to it earlier, if you have exercising muscle, so more muscle mass means better, less insulin resistance. So if you have less fat, more muscle, you tend to have less insulin resistance. And part of the reason is because exercising muscle for a full up to 48 hours after each bout of exercise, your insulin sensitivity goes up and your insulin resistance goes down. And what that means is it's easier for the insulin to unlock the door to let the sugar in for this furnace to burn it up if your muscles have exercised recently. So it's not as hard for the sugar to come inside when you're exercising. And then sleep and stress kind of in the same realm, because what happens when we're tired and we're not sleeping and we're stressed out, like Pam's class, we're chronically inflamed, right? It causes inflammation in our body. Lots of cortisol gets released, which is a natural steroid hormone in our body. And cortisol increases insulin resistance, increases fat storage on our body. So when someone could be eating really healthy and exercising, but if they're not sleeping well or chronically stressed, they're going to have a hard time losing weight. They're going to have more insulin resistance. It's going to not go well. So all 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine are important, especially for people with diabetes and many other conditions. But since we're talking about diabetes, next slide. Now, I don't know if do you want to try to play that? Because you have to cut off my microphone, right? Do you want to give it a try on this last video? If not, it's no big deal. I can keep. People online won't. Okay, that's fine. You can go actually some of the old recordings of the same class. You can watch those. But the other thing you can do is just go to nutritionfacts.org and just type in diabetes. And there's a whole bunch of videos that Dr. Greger has with all these topics and insulin resistance and things like that. So, that's all I want to say on that. We can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. That's what Einstein said. And I think that's what I've learned over the last 12 years is, we went from what was called the carbohydrate centric model to diabetes, which was all about cutting carbs and lowering sugar and eating more protein. And it's all about that and glycemic index and all these things. That's still kind of the thought process with diabetes treatment today, even though we had these studies back in 1928. And what we've noticed, and Charlie can attest to this in medicine, when we get new science that comes out, new studies and stuff, it can take sometimes 50 to 70 years before the whole medical field will kind of shift the thought process to get it to take hold. It's so antiquated. I mean, some things, if it means money, if it means more money because of technology, then they'll change on a dime. But if it's like just an overall thought process of how we thought things worked, and when you think about like bloodletting and leeches and all these things we used to do, and humors and all these things that, if you went and saw a doctor, 1,000 years ago, it's completely different than what it is now, right? And it's because we learned over time, but it takes a long time for the science to catch up with general practice. And so I think what I really learned is that, it's not the carbohydrate, it's not the sugar, it's not the carbohydrates, it's the fat. And that's that intramyocellular lipid we discussed. And so we gotta get rid of that. But I try to avoid that oversimplistic view of things, because it is just an overall shift in diet. And you can look at cultures that don't develop diabetes. Like just to kind of put it in more global terms, we're going to talk about the Tarahumara Indians that live in the Copper Canyon in Northwest Mexico. They're the genetic relatives, the equivalents of the Pima Indians that live in Arizona. Okay, so they're genetically identical people. The Tarahumara they're in the Copper Canyon, Northwest Mexico. They're 95% plant-based. They eat, berries and tubers, and they do kill a pig every once in a while for a celebration, but on a regular basis, all they're eating is plants. And they also do this kicking ball game where they kick a ball for like 48 hours. And the book Born to Run was if you ever watched or read that book, it's about these people. And Scott Jurek went and raced against them. He's the ultra marathoner guy. He's completely vegan, plant-based. And anyway, so these people are amazing. The running people. There's no diabetes, no heart disease amongst this entire tribe. None, zero. Yet the Pima Indians, their genetic equivalents that live in Arizona, they have some of the highest rates of heart disease, diabetes, obesity in the world. And they're genetically equivalent. Well, what's the difference? Well, they're eating, government cheese and spam and processed garbage, right? So that because it's what the government gives to them, subsidy and this and that. And so it's all about, that's the food. And of course, they're not out kicking a ball and running all the time either. So that contributes also. But just to show you, it's the food, it's not the genetics, it's the food that makes the difference. You can absolutely avoid things like heart disease, diabetes, just by changing the food and the lifestyle some. So that's really important to kind of take a good take home message. It's you gotta treat the cause of this problem. So and the other thing I didn't even talk about too is animal protein is also a independent risk factor for insulin resistance. We've learned that proteins are chains of amino acids, right? So these long chains of amino acids, and there's different kinds of amino acids, and there's a type in animal protein that's really high in animal protein called branched chain amino acids, and they seem to be able to come inside the cell and mess up the insulin signaling also. So they not just that the fat's in here and mucking up the ability for sugar to come in, but even the animal protein independent of the fat seems to be causing a problem. And some of the early studies that we got that idea was what is it about animal protein is because like the Adventist health studies showed us that people that even ate meat once or twice a month had higher risk of diabetes than someone that didn't eat meat at all. So a vegan versus a flexitarian. So even someone that's only eating meat a couple times a month, still significantly higher risk of diabetes than someone that doesn't eat animal products. And so even if they look at their fat content, it's like the same. So it's not just the fat, it's not just how much processed food you eat, it's also the animal protein. So another reason to try to avoid the animal products too, if you're trying to avoid diabetes. But questions? Thoughts? Was anybody surprised that fat is the cause of diabetes, not sugar? Yeah, because still your doctor will talk about this like, oh, just cut the carbs, and it's like Charlie talks about too. That's the mixed messaging. So cutting the carbs. So what does that mean? So like, so to you in the room, what does cutting carbs mean to you?
Donuts.
So cutting carbs is cutting crackers, pastries, donuts. That's correct. But a lot of people think, well, should I eat fruit? Should I eat vegetables? Should I eat potatoes? It's like, well, those are primarily carbohydrates. I mean, they have fat, they have protein too. Every food has a combination, but I mean, meat has a little if any carbohydrate. But so it's the overall package that makes sense or that is important because you'll say cut the carbohydrates, but then your doctor's saying, oh, but eat more fruits and vegetables. It's like, well, that's carbs. So it's just makes people confused. And so our way we teach about food and nutrition is so oversimplified to say, we always just think of foods as being a combination of carbs, fat, or protein. Like we think of, if you think of a donut, you would think of that as a carb. It's like, well, actually, most of the calories in a donut is fat, not sugar, because it's so high. It's just fried in oil. It's just oil with some white flour and some sugar, right? But most of the calories are coming from fat. So instead of thinking about looking at any particular food and saying, is that a fat, a carb, or a protein? We shouldn't be thinking that way. We should be thinking, what food packages should we be eating? And we want them to be unprocessed, whole plant foods for the most part, as much as we can, and avoid foods that have labels, foods that are made in a plant versus our plant, right? Yes, Ken.
So a lot of things should have as much sugar as sugar. I mean, like sugar cubes.
Right.
Like Coke has almost per ounce. I'm sorry, I just read this today.
Yeah.
So the question is, candy bars, candy, soda, regular soda. What exactly is happening when you eat so much sugar? Because a lot of people will eat a lot of sugar just before they do a lot of exertion.
Yeah.
So that's immediate energy.
Yeah, so sugar is a good short-term source of energy, but it's the overall package. So going back to what you were saying about, or I was saying about the food packages, and this is one of the Jeff Novick videos. Actually, I'll be showing it next week when I talk about calorie density and weight management next week. Is that you have a 2-pound pineapple. It's like over here is a 2-pound pineapple. Over here is 4 ounces of gummy bears. So 4 ounces of gummy bears fits in your palm of your hand. Here's a 2-pound pineapple. They both have the exact same amount of sugar, but so people say, well, I can't eat the pineapple. It's got sugar in it, just like the gummy bears. But what's 100% of the weight of the gummy bears? Sugar. What's 99% of the weight of the pineapple? It's fiber, it's water, it's all the vitamins, minerals, micronutrients in a perfect package, just right for you. and you'd be stuffed if you ate a whole 2 pound pineapple. You probably couldn't even do it. But the 4 ounces of gummy bears, that'd be like 2 bites and it's gone, right? And so it's not the sugar that's the problem; it's the package that it comes in is the problem. And so you can eat sugar from its natural source, as nature intended, from fruit, but you don't want to distill it down into a white crystalline powder and put it in something and then eat a processed food, because it has a completely different effect on your body than the whole natural package it came in. So yeah, if you're going to go exercise, eat some pineapple before you go exercise instead of sugar. But if you're high performance, like back when I was racing bikes and stuff like that, I take these little glucose gel sports. You see, if you ever watch the Tour de France, I used to do that kind of stuff. Never raced in the Tour, but I did race in Europe, and I was on a big team in Europe. But so you take them out of your thing and you squirt glucose into your mouth, because you're getting down to the last few miles of the race or whatever. You want that surge of energy so you can make it to the finish line. And so that's kind of an exception, because you're just being burned up so quickly. It's not really going to be end up being stored as fat and things like that. So, but it, what could potentially, if you did that all the time, could cause inflammation, because, just pure sugar does cause inflammation in the body. And that's why you don't want to eat too much sugar and things like that.
Probably explained it, but I miss it a lot. Even though I'm paying attention. So how does sugar, fat is a nutrient.
Mhm.
So how does sugar turn into fat?
Yeah. So when you have sugar, so the question is, how does sugar turn into fat? So it's something called gluconeogenesis. So what it happens is your body's like, okay, there's a lot of calories here. I'm using some of the sugar for energy right now, but I got too many calories here. So then it essentially goes into your liver, becomes triglyceride, and then that floats around as fat. And so then that fat some of it will get into the cell, like we talked about. Some of it will go into the fat cells to get stored. And so it'll eventually become fat because it's excess calories. If you're taking in more calories than you're burning, whether you're eating fat or protein or carbohydrate, which sugar is just carbohydrate, you're going to eventually store it as fat, the excess calories, because that's where ultimately we get all our calories is from carbohydrate, fat, and protein is where all calories come from. They're the three macronutrients that we have. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks for the triglyceride.
Triglyceride, yeah. And that's why we know that drinking a lot of soda and eating a lot of sugar actually contributes to fatty liver, because all that sugar load, your body can't burn it all up. And so then it goes to your liver and gets turned into fat. And that's why it leads to fatty liver. So we know that alcohol contributes to fatty liver because it's a lot of calories, 9 calories per gram, or 7 calories per gram in alcohol. Fat's 9 calories per gram. Carbohydrates and protein are 4 calories per gram. So any excess calories, no matter what, it's going to get stored as fat. But when people eat a lot of white flour, white sugar, alcohol, that quickly turns to fat in the liver, and people that are predisposed to fatty liver store a lot of fat in their liver. And that's now the number one cause of liver cancer. No longer is alcohol; it's now fatty liver. It's called non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. So non-alcoholic, steato means fat, hepatitis, inflammation of the liver, right? So I'm diagnosing tons of my patients with that. So, their liver enzymes go up. I do an ultrasound, it shows fatty liver. I get a liver elastography test, which shows if there's any scarring in the liver. And a lot of times my patients will already have scarring, which can eventually lead to liver cancer, and you could die from liver cancer. So it's a really big problem. And that's all going back to insulin resistance, right? Fat being stored in somewhere it's not supposed to. You're not supposed to store fat in your liver or in your muscles or in your pancreas. Yeah.
And you're finding that, have you found that when it's able to reverse it, when you found it?
Yeah. So the question is, can you reverse it when you find it? And the answer is yes. Actually, there's some studies that have been out already. There's a study right now going on at the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, PCRM. Hanna Kaliova, she's the head of the research department at PCRM, and they're doing one right now where they're taking patients on a low oil vegan diet, versus the kind of a control diet. And they're doing that MR spectroscopy I was telling you about, to the where you do where's the fat being stored, and they're showing that the people that it hasn't been published yet, but the people that are on the vegan low fat vegan type of a diet are actually showing they're getting the fat out of the muscles in the liver, and the people that are on the control group are adding more fat to the liver and in the muscles. And so it's good promising results that you can actually pull that fat out of that liver and improve that condition. Once you have scarring, I don't think there's any data that shows that you can reverse the scarring once it's there, but you can kind of freeze the scarring and hopefully start pulling the fat out. I have had patients that when they started changing their diet towards more plant-based, their liver enzymes went back to normal, so that they were high. And we did all the workup and everything, and then after a few months of eating a more plant-based diet, their liver enzymes came back down to normal. So it just means that because what liver enzymes are is when the liver cells are unhappy, it's toxic environment, they start to rupture. The liver cells rupture, and there's enzymes inside the liver cells that are spilling out into the blood then. And so on a standard blood test, this is on every blood test you guys do, it's called a complete metabolic panel, and it'll check your liver ALT and AST are two of the liver enzymes, and your doctor will follow those, because if they're high, they'll say, oh, have you been sick recently? Have you drank some alcohol? Those are some of the other reasons they'll temporarily go high. But when you have patients that are mildly elevated and it's over a longer period of time and they don't drink and things like that, then that's when maybe you have fatty liver, and then you get an ultrasound, and sure enough, they'll find it. So, other questions? Any things you want to add, Charlie, to sum up?
Maybe you could go over with them also. What are we encouraging you to eat? Plants. So the next question is, what plants might be concerning if you have diabetes? What plant foods are you currently eating right now that could be making your diabetes worse?
Seeds in that.
It's a trick question, yeah? No, it's not really a trick question, but it's something that we want you to think about. Something very practical.
Fruits.
What is it?
Fruits.
Fruit. Why fruit?
They have high sugar.
Yeah, so that goes back to the message that we've been listening to from the registered dietitians for years. Don't eat too much carbohydrate. It has too much sugar. But when you eat sugar that comes packaged with the fiber, it doesn't cause you the problem. So fruit is actually healthy. More fruit, more vegetables. But there are other foods that you are currently eating that are not healthy for you, that are plants.
What is it?
What is it? Well, I'm trying to stretch your brain a little bit. Yes, Ken.
Dried fruits.
So dried fruit, what happens with dried fruit? You suck the water out and you have the same package of fiber. The cell walls are all intact, and that's the fiber. You haven't destroyed that. All the nutrients in the regular fruit are still there. You haven't destroyed that. So that's not the answer.
No.
Nuts. What about nuts? What is there about nuts that could make them problematic? Now, some nuts in your diet are healthy, but if you have too much, what would you be getting too much of? Fat. When you think of fat, you think peanut butter, almond butter. Oh, that spreads on and you like it, and it's a plant, and it can be healthy in, a couple tablespoons. I think Gregor recommends is a serving of nuts, a quarter of a cup of nuts, and that's what he recommends every day. But be careful of the quantity of nuts, because it's so easy. I know. You walk by and here's the package. You just lift the lid and you just grab a few more, and then you go about your business, and then a couple hours later, there's some nuts that I could eat. And you just grab a few more, and pretty soon you're up to a half a cup and a full cup for the day. And you're adding a bunch of fat into your cells, causing your insulin resistance to go what? Up. You don't want to do that. You want to keep your insulin resistance low. And the way you're going to do that is to lower the fat. Now, nuts are not the only source of fat in plants. Can you think of anything else? We're trying to be very practical here.
Avocados.
Avocado. Avocado is 750 calories a pound. You want to be eating foods that are less than, they want to be in the 400 to 600, about 500 calories a pound range. Avocados are above that. So I've had a number of people who say, I'm eating totally plant-based, but I'm not controlling my diabetes or I'm not losing weight. I said, what are you eating? Well, I have 3 avocados every day. Most people are not, since the cost of avocado is rising so rapidly here, but it can happen. So now we still have not hit upon the one that is even worse than all the rest of them. Oil. Oil is the correct answer. How many of you are using oil in your salad dressing? Vinegar and oil, or an oil-based dressing? Just a little. You don't have to use that. If you want to lower your insulin resistance, you could just get by with balsamic vinegar by itself. It comes in different flavors. It's exciting to taste those. There's fig balsamic vinegar, there's coconut balsamic vinegar, there's plain balsamic vinegar. I've had them all. Chocolate balsamic vinegar. You can make a variety if you don't like the same salad dressing. And there's a lot of salad dressing. Scott's put them on the website. You can find it, of oilless dressings. But where is the area that you're using more of the oils other than your dressing? What is it?
Frying and cooking.
Yeah, you're cooking. How many of you are using oil to saute vegetables? If you're using that, you could replace that with water or vegetable broth and just eliminate that oil. And if you are using a lot of baked goods, how healthy is that? Baked goods, they stick to the pan. So you don't want the muffin to stick in the pan. It's not the healthiest choice, but if you have to use something nonstick, get a paper towel, wipe out the area after you put some oil on the pan if you're making some baked good. Again, baked goods are going to be highly processed foods generally, so be careful about how many of those you're eating. But think about oils. How do you reduce that? Think about the fats in the nuts. And there's one fruit that you really need to be careful about because you'll see it in a lot of recipes. Yeah, a lot of vegetarian and vegan recipes. And what's that fruit? Comes from the Polynesian country. Coconut. Coconut has tons of saturated fat, which is really the worst fat you can get. And so coconut milk, do you think that is a healthy choice? Even though it's in a recipe, in a vegan or a vegetarian cookbook. Be careful to use your mind. Think, how much fat am I getting if I want to lower the insulin resistance? Thanks.
Yeah, and next week when I talk about the calorie density and weight management, you'll see a depiction of we'll talk all about these different foods and how many calories per pound in the different categories of food. And it's a good tie-in with the diabetes because you'll see that. And so hopefully, yeah, it's not carbohydrate that's the problem. It's not it's not the sugar, it's the fat, but it's the packages of the food too. So even though avocados are healthy, nuts and seeds are healthy, you can eat a little bit, but if you're trying to reverse diabetes, reverse insulin resistance, lose weight, you got to be careful about the fats from plants as well, especially if they're processed into oils, which is oil is the worst. So because it's just you just took, you're better off eating an olive or two than eating olive oil, for example, because at least you got the fiber with the olives and all the nutrients and whatnot. So, but yeah,
And now that you mentioned olive oil, we
Yeah.
missed one food.
olives.
Olives.
Yeah.
Be careful about how many you're throwing in your mouth at one time, because they are a high fat oil food.
And once you reverse your insulin resistance, you could probably introduce some of it back in a little bit over time because it can take. I've had people reverse their insulin resistance in like 3 months. I've had some people it's taken a couple of years. Just depends genetically and what their diet's like and how long they've had the insulin resistance. There's a lot of factors. Everybody's individual, but I've had patients where they were on like 100 units of insulin, had really high blood sugars, and then 6 months later, completely whole food plant based. They're off their insulin, off all their medications, no more insulin resistance, no their blood sugars are normal. Everything goes back to normal in like 6 months. And I've seen that happen. So some people are that quick, but some people it takes a lot longer. But I'm glad you guys came. Any other questions, let me know. But otherwise, we'll see you next week. Yeah. Thank you.
Hummus. Hummus could be your new fat. It has kind of a texture like fat. It has tahini in it. And it has some fat in it. But it could be used as kind of this substitute. Where you use it in a lot of areas where you're thinking you need to have fat.
You can make your own hummus.
Yeah.
You can control it.
Right.
Yes.
You make your own hummus, you can control it. You don't have to put tahini in it or oil in it or anything. Because tahini is just ground up sesame seeds. So, but it's a lot of fat. So if you're trying to make a lower fat version of hummus, just garbanzo beans and garlic and pepper, whatever flavors, whatever things you want in there and other herbs and spices. And you can just use that. And that's good for instead of like a mayonnaise. So I do that all the time. I'll do like I'll even use like some whole grain bread and I'll put hummus on there and I'll put cucumber and tomatoes and stuff on there to make it like a sandwich or something like that. Yeah.
So what's a guideline for how much fat you should have, that you should limit yourself to? If you're, I'm not talking about oil, because
Yeah.
we quit using oil,
Yeah.
but the avocado and all this other stuff.
Right. So what's the right amount of fat? So, I mean, it's going to depend. Every person's going to be different, whether they have weight to lose, whether they have insulin resistance they're trying to reverse. But if you were on a 100% whole food plant-based diet, like just immaculate, no processed foods whatsoever, you're just eating unprocessed whole plant foods with kind of like Dr. Greger with, a quarter cup of nuts, maybe, half an avocado once or twice a week or something like that. And that was pretty much it. The rest was, fruits, vegetables, beans, whole grains. You're probably getting about 10 to 15% of your calories still from fat. And so because there's no such thing as a no fat diet. Even if you didn't eat any avocados or nuts or seeds, you're still probably around 10% of your calories are still going to be fat. So, and then about 80 or so percent is going to be carbohydrate and probably about 20% or 15 to 20% protein, somewhere in there, 70 to 80% carbs. And, so if you look at those are the macro kind of percentages, but there really isn't an ideal because you can create a diet that's completely crap, it's processed, and still have the same ratio of carbs to fat to protein. So my answer to you just would be maybe don't worry about it. Just like just what food packages are you choosing? What are your health goals? What's your health condition? What are you, and that's where you can, have a meeting with Charlie and what are your goals and what can we tweak if something needs to be tweaked to help you get to your health goals. And so, hopefully that answered your question. There's not like a magic number or anything. When they look at studies, if you're just looking from a research perspective, most of when they do the glucose tolerance tests and looking at what percent of calories are from fat, and when they say high fat, low fat and stuff, you'll see that they'll always say, oh, low fat diet didn't work or whatever. If you actually look at those studies, they weren't really low fat. They the control group was like 35% of their calories were fat, and the group that they called low fat was 30% of their calories were fat. So that was a lower fat diet, but that wasn't a low fat diet. When you look at all of the literature ever done on studies looking at high fat versus low fat, only the ones that go below 20% fat are the ones that actually show the big metabolic benefits, the reducing the insulin resistance and things. So if I was to pick a number, I'd say be under 20% if you're going to keep track or look at that kind of stuff. But I try not to let people to go too much down that path, because you'll get too focused on a number and you'll lose the forest from the trees. You want to be always thinking about what are the healthiest food packages that I could choose to achieve my health goals. Yeah.
I just want to add a little bit to that. If you don't have diabetes, you're not taking any pills, you don't, your weight is an ideal body weight, you're healthy and happy, you get to eat what you want to eat. Eat what you want to eat. If you're having health problems, then you want to keep trimming until you get to the point that you no longer have those problems.
That kind of follows in with what I was going to ask, but you mentioned earlier too about the glucose tolerance.
Yeah.
We're hearing about this long time ago.
Yeah.
Do you use that with your patients, or is it pretty much you're using other mechanisms to be able to tell that they're insulin issues?
Yeah. The question is, do we still use glucose tolerance tests? I don't personally. I mean, they're pretty much reserved for the most part for pregnant women, but you can do them. I mean, you can order them. But I think what's more useful, has more utility, is especially with my patients with diabetes, is I say, okay, so I can look at the insulin requirements, and that does help, and their insulin sensitivity. So, I used to have to give myself 10 units when I ate, 40 carbs. Now I only have to give myself, 1 unit for 40 carbs or something, or 80. I can eat 80 carbs and only need 1 unit of insulin. So that right there is like a glucose tolerance test. It's like, oh, well, your insulin sensitivity, your glucose tolerance is improved. Your insulin sensitivity is improved. Your insulin resistance is lowered. So that people that are on insulin, that's fairly easy. And then the other one, for someone that's not on insulin, I can say, because they'll tell me all the time, like early on in their dietary change, they'll say, yeah, Scott, but when I eat a bowl of fruit, when I eat rice and beans, my sugar goes really high. And so then they blame the fruit, they blame the rice and the beans. No, it's not the rice and the beans. It's the cheese, the pork, the chicken, the bacon, the eggs, the sausage. Those foods are the cause of the problem. So those foods are the cause of your sugar going high when you eat fruit, rice, and beans. But then, so as they start getting rid of the animal products, the fats, the cheese, the bacon, the sausage, they start getting rid of that stuff. Then, 3 months later, 6 months later, oh, now I can eat the fruit and the rice and the beans. Now my blood sugar doesn't go too high. So there you go. You just showed that you can reverse your insulin resistance. You're reversing your insulin resistance because your insulin sensitivity has gone up, insulin resistance has gone down. Is that helpful? Yeah. All right.
He's calling night. Hope to see you. Thank you.
So cereal,
Okay, that's the last one I talked about.
Yes.
That's on
hydrate. Cereal might have.
Oh, I have.
According to this, there you are. It's like
Very.
no carbohydrate. It almost looks
It's so wild because we live under, what we've learned in our brain.
something like
Yes.
sugar.
Any sugar.
So
that
what
causes
is?
diabetes.
Yeah.
I think you
It
touched
takes
on it.
these factors.
I never thought about it.
The risk of eating something strong says that now.
Trying to be
Yeah.
The whole new, you know, those, there, one place or whatever. Yes, there's still a better price. Because they yeah. But it's gonna be easy to have a good calories. Thank you. So when you eat too many calories, by the more likely to store fat and you learn the story more.
Oh, yeah, yeah, we sure did.
Because you don't want to be in a calorie.
And you sure explained
It's
something
amazing
that
the
has
amount of
been a mystery to me, and that is his grandpa,
So
my brother, are
if
thin.
something's got,
And they have done heavy work.
actually, there's some things that have a lot of carbs.
Yeah.
That
Grandma,
also have.
who did work too, who is really overweight.
It's fiber,
It's not diabetic.
carb ratio.
And it just,
What happened?
It doesn't make out, so,
no,
I
it
mean,
doesn't.
when you look at it,
Like we can't look
we're
at
talking
the
about
outside
looking
of
at
the
the anybody have any, and how many, you know, there's it's about, so you can use that five to know if it's.
A lot of them.
But I never.
Have a lot of focus.
Yeah,
And
so they don't need, most things don't need a lot of food. It's like Great Lakes, for example, like 7 or 8 to 1, depending on
Yeah.
so it does have some fiber, and it's a lot of that. We're saying we still got too many carbohydrates for 5 people, and you don't have to eat you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about the carb.
Well, you'll see it again. Nice, nice meeting you, Caroline.
So you want to stick to the whole food, that's gonna be slow absorption, that's gonna not have, well, that's not gonna have the same effect on your health that processed. Fiber.
So I can eat a 20 kilogram cereal that has six
Yeah, I think there's a. Cereal, I've never done, cereal bread, I mean, it's the, I have made the cereal, but there was some way, there's another cereal, it's the man, hardcore.
I remember we just have some.
Yeah, for different ones.
But
But for the most part, you know, that's why we say avoid things. I guess the next.